Alrighty, so today's collector actually came up last week as a determiner on this label, specifically as a hard to read name. But luckily it was someone that I am familiar with from the bryophyte collection here at Tennessee. And so I recognize the name most likely as M. Bizot. And in this case, it was not his actual handwriting, but we do have issues with his as well, as you can see on this label for one of his specimens. So the signature here at the bottom is also pretty tricky to read. Luckily, we are helped on a lot of his specimens by a stamp at the top. And of course, this particular one is smeared, so it's also hard to read, but I'll show you a better example that's more legible where we can see it's the Herbarium M. Bizot, which basically translates to the Herbarium of M. Bizot. So in knowing that, I think if you look back at the signature, you can sort of make out a very sloppy M, B-I-Z-O-T. And I'm not sure if I would have figured that out without the stamp, but now that I've seen it, it's easy to recognize because I recognize that I've seen it a lot. So anyways, our specimen was collected in 1953 in France, in a city called Chalancey. And in this, which stands for Haute-Marne, which is a department of France. And that city or town is in northeastern France here. Wikipedia says its population in 2020 was 106 people. And looking here at an aerial view, you can see it's a pretty small town surrounded by farmland. So the specimen, which is here, which I think is really beautiful and striking, was identified on the label as Abietinella hystricosa, which I could not find, but I'm pretty sure it's a slight misspelling of HY hystricosa, which now is a synonym for Thuidium abietinum. Interestingly, I thought the genus Thuidium comes from the genus name Thuja, which are the cedars, and the species, this ABIE in the species and in that original genus actually refers to the genus Abies, which are fir trees. And I think both are very fitting because the moss does in fact look like a tiny version of those trees. As you can see in this picture, I think it's very adorable. And this particular species is circumboreal, so it lives in northern regions across the globe. And it says it likes dry calcareous habitats from sandy to rocky or turfy soil, and these stems can grow up to 12 centimeters long. So I did find our collector online. Sadly, not a lot of information. There was really just kind of one main article in the Bryologist Journal after he passed away with really not a lot of detail. So again, I'll really just be able to share what I was able to find. So M. Bizot was Maurice Louis Jean Bizot. He was born in 1905 in Dijon, France, which is also in northern France, but in a different department called Côte d'Or, which is also called the Gold Coast. And if you're curious, it is the birthplace of Dijon mustard, which was invented back in 1856. So after high school, he studied both biology and pharmacy, and he would go on to work in both hospitals and universities. I don't have a ton of specifics, but I do know that he was a professor of botany at the University of Dijon, which today is the University of Burgundy. It's said that he, quote, developed a passion for biology that continued for the remainder of his life. His first biological paper was published in 1931 when he was 26, and he was documenting local flora in that department. And he also went on to specialize in African bryophytes, especially those in Central and South Africa. And he was also involved in studying the biology of the tropical Americas and the Middle East. Interestingly, I can't find evidence that he actually got to go and visit and collect in most of those places. The vast majority of his digitized specimens are from France. So it seems that he mostly studied material from botanists who lived and worked in those regions, or his friends who took trips to collect there, and also loans from institutions. He did a lot of work studying and identifying those specimens, and published a number of papers on new taxa. He worked with the Museum of Natural History, National Museum of Natural History in Paris, and in 1970 became a correspondent of the museum. Bizot passed away in 1979 at the age of 74, and his personal herbarium was transferred to the Natural History Museum, and that herbarium is known by the acronym PC. So the only other detail I was able to find out about his life is that he appeared to serve in World War II. He's listed as serving in the French Forces of the Interior, which originated as rebel forces inside occupied France. And there's not really any other obviously publicly accessible detail that I could find. But one curious thing that I noticed on this record is that it says alias Sapaju, which strangely, when I look it up, is another name for capuchin monkeys. But there is no other information. And I looked at some records of other people in this database, and no one else had an alias. So I really don't know what that means. It's kind of an intriguing mystery, but sadly, I can't give you any more detail about that. So I like to think he had a cool code name, but yeah, I'd love to know more about it, but I really don't have any details, sadly. So in Tropicos, his name associated with more than 170 different taxon names. He published over 90 scientific works pretty steadily over 50 years. And so in addition to new taxon descriptions, he published moss floras for regions of France, Italy, Brazil, and Cuba in the Americas, the Middle East, Afghanistan, and a number of countries and regions in Africa. In recognition of his work, there are one moss genus, Bizotia, and at least 5 species were named in his honor. And these are 2 type specimens that bear his names. Both are housed in that Paris herbarium. Specimen-wise, I found over 1,400 that he collected in our bryophyte portal, and there's a lot more that he identified. Here at Tennessee, we have over 300 specimens with him as the determiner, and all of those are from Africa, and many of them are from A.J. Sharp's expeditions in East Africa, but also he worked on specimens from other collectors, so I'm sure there's a lot more that he touched out there. I found only 6 specimens in the lichen portal, 4 in the vascular symbiota, and then over 3,000 in GBIF. And I also searched the online database for the PC herbarium and found 1,200 plus that he collected and almost 7,000 that his name is associated in their database, which that includes things that were identified by him and specimens that were part of his personal herbarium. And the PC herbarium actually does have a nice website, and you can search and view some of those that are digitized, and some of them are imaged, the specimens too. So it's kind of neat to look, and I'll share that link. So that is M. Bizot, Maurice Bizot, pharmacist and bryologist. It's said that he became an internationally recognized moss authority, was frequently consulted for bryological advice, and was known for being a calm and courteous gentleman. So not a bad legacy to leave. I might add questionable handwriting, but that's not the end of the world. And hopefully now you can recognize his name if you see this signature in the future. So thank you again for listening.